It's time for Fridays with AI, where we ask AI to rewrite Philly sports history. Every Friday, only on This Day in Philly Sports History.
That's right. It is time for Fridays with AI. You know what? What could have been? Let's find out what could have been. I decided this week to ask AI what would have happened if the Phillies did not blow the 6.5 game lead with 12 games left. And the results may surprise you. We just talked about Bunning, Allen, and Callison being our missing rings because obviously they would have had a shot because the Cardinals did beat the Yankees in the World Series that year. So why couldn't the Phillies have beaten the Yankees in the World Series? So in this alternate reality that I asked AI to create where the 64 Phillies did not choke and did win the National League pennant, it's interesting. Chico Ruiz still steals home, and the difference is in this reality, the team doesn't go in a tailspin. Gene Mauch doesn't panic, and he trusts his other starting pitchers in the rotation, Dennis Bennett and Art Mahaffrey, and they hold their own. They do well enough to keep the Phillies afloat. Obviously, they didn't go into the tailspin they did, but, I mean, they kept it interesting down the stretch, going 7-5 in those last 12 games. The National League pennant came down to the last day of the season against the Reds at Connie Mack Stadium. And in dramatic fashion, our guy with the missing ring, Johnny Callison, hit a walk-off bottom of the ninth homer to win the pennant for the Phillies. Pandemonium in Philly. It wouldn't have been Broad Street at the time. It would have been, I guess Connie Mack was close enough to Broad Street. Either way, pandemonium in the streets of Philly. They love this team. They finished out the magical 1964 run where Callison hit the walk-off in the All-Star game, does the same thing to win the pennant for the Phillies. Jim Bunning pitched the perfect game on Father's Day. Dick Allen wins Rookie of the Year. Finally win the pennant after 14 years of waiting, and it's a rematch of that 1950 World Series against the Yankees. Now, how does that World Series play out? Well, Jim Bunning and Chris Short, obviously, because Gene Mauch did not overuse them and relied on Bennett and Mahaffrey as well, they're rested going into the World Series. And both of them step up under the bright lights in the World Series and star. But in the World Series, the MVP should have been Dick Allen, who just had an epic World Series. You still had some hints of racism and things like that. He slugged over 300, hitting 3 home runs, played great defense, both in with his arm, catching the ball. But the MVP went to Johnny Callison, who hit a 3-run bottom of the ninth walk-off home run off of Mel Stoudemire to win the World Series for the Phillies at Connie Mack. Obviously, you have to give the MVP to Callison, I guess, there. But Dick Allen was the star of the series. Callison was the hero. Phillies win the game 5-2, win the World Series in 7 games. Just a flair for the dramatic. Now, put that on ice here on a while because we're going to get back to the dramatic and heroics and things like that. But what was the aftermath? I don't think it's far-fetched that if the Phillies didn't blow it down the stretch, that they win the World Series against the Yankees. After all, the Cardinals did the same thing. But I'm more interested in what happened afterwards because it seems like there were a generation of Philly fans who were scarred pretty deep from the fold or the collapse, whatever you want to call it. Well, they do start a mini little dynasty. They won 2 more pennants in the next 4 years. They never won a World Series again. But it changes the trajectory of the team, though, where they don't go in the tank and they're terrible in the early 70s. And they do win another World Series in the early 70s. So this core group from 64 only won the one. But the trajectory of the team changes, and because they're able to stay afloat and become sort of a place where people want to play, they did win another one in the early 70s. Dick Allen and the fans don't have as much beef. I think one way or the other, Philly fans are going to give players crap, and I think Dick Allen was the kind of guy that was going to give it right back. but he stays in Philly his whole career, becomes a beloved player in Phillies sports history, and does get into the Hall of Fame on his own merit. But the story of this, if the Phillies did not collapse in '64, is more about the fans. The identity of Philly fans is not the bitter, we booed Santa Claus, threw snowballs at him type, but just one of fierce loyalty. That even though it was interesting down the stretch, they stayed with the team and really followed through with them. And Philly Tough becomes sort of a moniker and a way of life. And then that just kind of gets fueled on when the Rocky movie comes out in the late 70s, because the Phillies at that point have won two World Series, were one of the better teams then in the National League, and then retooling with Mike Schmidt and those guys in the late 70s. So Philly Tough becomes the moniker and the motto of Philly fans, and becomes really a way of life. And it's the perfect sort of way to describe the fans of Philly, the people of Philadelphia. Obviously, there's no curse of Billy Penn. The Eagles win a Super Bowl before 1952. And again, this might be a little AI getting a little wonky here. Wilt Chamberlain stays with the Sixers his whole career. They don't win an extra championship, but they do stay competitive. Gene Mauch is known not so much as a choker, but as a managerial genius. Becomes a Hall of Famer, wins World Series with other teams. But this is where it gets interesting. 1976 was a big pop culture moment in Philadelphia history. Obviously, you had Rocky coming out that December anyway. But there was another movie that came out called Miracle in Red Pinstripes, the story of the 1964 Phillies, starring Robert Redford as Jim Bunning. So it really was up there, and because it was based on a true story, fans loved it. And sure, they loved Rocky, but more people wanted to see Miracle in Red Pinstripes than the Rocky movie. But yeah, and of course Robert Redford starred as Jim Bunning, didn't hurt. But the Phillies become America's lovable underdogs turned champions. That's sort of the mindset, and you know how we embrace the underdog mentality here in Philly. And one little last pop culture moment, if the Phillies don't blow this, there's a song that comes out coinciding with the start of the famous race by the same name called Broad Street Run. It's a B-side on one of Bruce Springsteen's albums, and it's about growing up in a city where even the Phillies win. Comes out in 1980, the same year that the Phillies win the World Series for their third title, and becomes sort of the anthem of the 1980 Phillies teams. And a song that Bruce Springsteen didn't necessarily think was going to be big becomes big because the Phillies win the World Series. So Broad Street Run by Bruce Springsteen becomes one of his most famous songs. Now, who knows if any of that's going to happen, but according to AI, the Phillies would have won the World Series had they not blown it down the stretch in 1964. This has been Fridays with AI. Had a little bit of fun here on a Friday with that. I would love to see, like, even if it's like a made-up movie now, if somebody wants to make Miracle in Red Pinstripes, sounds like a pretty good story. But anyway, thank you. That was Fridays with AI.